Welcome to the Mid Week Tease with me, Adele Onyango, where I share some random and not too random thoughts on things. And in this episode, we're talking about sibling dynamics. But before I get into that, Happy New Year. I'm not too sure I've told you this, but Happy New Year. And this is the first episode of 2026 of the Mid Week Tease. And it has been inspired by the storyteller who has started off our year on the Legally Clueless podcast that goes out every single Monday. Her name is Hekaya, and part 1 went out this week, and she really unpacks family dynamics, but also more specifically, sibling dynamics. Now, this is not an episode about blaming your family. It's not about, indicting your parents. And it's definitely not about deciding who was right or wrong. I want you to think of this episode as being about truth. The truth that lives very quietly in the body. The kind of truth that you don't always have the language for, and sometimes you even feel guilty for even attempting to name it. That's what this episode is about. So because of Hekaya's story, I've been thinking about siblings and this assumption that if you grew up in the same house, you must have had the same childhood. But very many of us know that that is not how it works, all right? Here's something that can be very difficult to accept, especially in families that had a level of dysfunction, which I feel like is like a majority of the families, right? So where there was survival and sacrifice, and we did our best are the central narratives, right? In those families, 2 children can grow up under that same roof with the very same parents in that very same environment and still carry entirely different emotional realities into their adulthood. And that doesn't mean any one of them is lying. One of my favorite psychologists, I love listening to his interviews, his talks. He's called Gabor Maté. He often talks about the idea that trauma isn't defined by the event itself. So let's say in a family setting, you had an abusive parent or an alcoholic parent. The trauma that you have from that event, from that environment, isn't defined by the event. It is defined by how your nervous system experiences that trauma. Am I making sense? So it's not about what is happening outside of you. It's about what is happening inside of you because of the environment or the event. So what mattered wasn't just what happened, but whether you felt seen during this event, whether you felt protected, whether you felt emotionally held during this event. So because of this, one sibling may remember childhood as being stable. Another remembers it as being constricting. One may feel celebrated. Another may feel watched. Same home, different internal worlds. And when those differences are dismissed, so like when you hear conversations with siblings where you've said your experience and then it's met with, that wasn't my experience, or it's met with, but it wasn't that bad. You can really sink into confusion and self-doubt and start wondering, why am I not experiencing or remembering the event or feeling the feelings that are similar to my sisters or to my brothers? It's because you're an entirely different person. And yes, you grew up in the same home. Yes, you grew up in the same dysfunction. Yes, you grew up experiencing the same dysfunction, but you all have different internal worlds. I remember when I first heard Dr. Gabor Maté talk about this, so much made sense to me, man. So much. And I knew I have to tell you about this on this episode. The other thing I want to share is something I learned in 2022 in one of my therapy sessions, right? And it's about birth order and invisible rules. I think I've alluded to it on previous Legally Clueless episodes, but I want to go deeper into it now. And at the time in therapy, I was unpacking all of my family relationships and just combing through them, seeing what's comfortable, what's not, what do I remember, what am I not naming, what's my contribution to this, what's the other person's contribution to this. You know what I mean? I was really doing like an audit, you would say. But in doing so, and I always found it so interesting because 2022, I started therapy with a new therapist. And one of the first questions she'd asked me is, are you the firstborn? Are you the middleborn? Are you like, what's your birth order? Right. And I found that so interesting because I was like, what does that matter about? You know what I mean? What are you asking me about? But birth order and invisible rules, these are not random things. These are things that are shaped by rules we never consciously agreed to. And I remember the more I understood it in therapy, the more I wanted to read up on it. And in reading up on it, I found a theory called the Adler's theory, and it's by a psychologist called Alfred Adler. And he spoke about how children adapt themselves to find belonging within the family system. And what influences this is like birth order, timing, temperament, circumstance. All of this influence who a child becomes in order to survive emotionally. All right? So you adopt a persona to survive. And what influences this persona? Many things, including your birth order, right? And so some of these roles or personas that you adopt are like the responsible one, the peacemaker, the high achiever, the golden child, the rebellious one, the quiet one who learned not to need too much, the clown, which was the one I adopted for so long. And these roles, this is where healing is such a mindfuck, right? These roles aren't your personality traits. They're strategies, okay? Children are so smart, my goodness. They're strategies that you adopt and implement so that you can survive emotionally. And sometimes you implement them so well, which was the case for me, that you start to think that this is your personality and you carry it on way past your childhood into your adulthood. Even when you are now in a safe environment, you still carry out these roles because at this point you're thinking this is your personality, you know, and it's not. And a lot of these roles come with like invisible contracts, right? So things like you've got to be so good so that things don't fall apart. If you are the golden child, I know you feel that. Or don't outshine your sibling. Or I have to carry the emotional weight. Mm? Or listen to this one because I think you might find yourself in this one. Don't ask for too much. So the problem comes in here, right? We grow up, but these rules still linger deeply within us. And then suddenly you are an adult and you're still trying to prove your worth. You're still shrinking yourself. You're still exhausted by expectations that no one ever named. You're still performing as the clown to try and keep the peace. And all of that time, which is really super sad, at least in my opinion, is that you're spending so much of your adulthood life being someone that you are not, you know? Another thing I wanted to touch on is comparison and that quiet competition within a sibling dynamic, right? In many homes, and this, I know you identify with this. In many homes, comparison is framed as motivation, right? So you hear things like, why can't you be more like your sister or your brother? Or your brother managed to do this, why can't you? Or your sister never gave us this trouble. But comparison doesn't teach excellence. It teaches conditional belonging, right? So it teaches children that love is scarce and that it must be earned. I have to do this to get love, to get acceptance. And this is how quiet competition forms, right? It doesn't form because siblings want to compete, right? But it forms because they're fighting for safety, fighting for attention, fighting for approval. And this happens in childhood, but even in adulthood, that competition can linger quietly. So you start feeling resentful, but you're ashamed of that feeling, but it is there. Or you start feeling like you're always being measured, or you feel like you're unseen even when you succeed. Sometimes siblings get along, in quotes, but there's something underneath that feels tense or guarded. I know I'm speaking to you. I know you felt it. That tension isn't random, right? It really is like the remains or the residue of being compared in childhood instead of being seen or understood. Another part that is so important that I talk to you about, my goodness, is when you realize that your siblings aren't emotionally safe, right? And I think this is the part that many people struggle to say out loud, that sometimes your siblings are not your safe place. And it's not because they're cruel and it's not because they intended harm, but it's because they learned perhaps the same emotional rules that you did. So, rules like don't talk about your feelings, don't challenge the narrative, don't be too sensitive, don't make things uncomfortable, right? So, because of this, you then learn to edit yourself when you're around your siblings, right? You keep the conversations to be very surface level. We never go too deep. You don't share your deepest thoughts there. And over time, you might then realize quietly to yourself that we are related, but we're not emotionally close. That realization, where it can come with very many feelings. It can come with grief. It can come with guilt. I think even guilt is the first one that comes before grief. And it can even come with confusion. But it doesn't mean you're cold. It doesn't mean you're broken or you're unforgiving. It just means you're listening to your nervous system. And sometimes this is the reality, you know? Now, I am not in this episode asking you to confront anyone. I'm just asking you to be honest with yourself. I'm asking you to say, this didn't feel safe for me, all right? Or to say, I needed something different. Or, very important one, to say, I experienced this differently. And when you start being honest with yourself, remember that you don't need your siblings to agree with this feeling or this honesty that you're unpacking. And you don't need permission to name your truth. And you don't need to collapse your experience so that you can preserve harmony. Because once you start doing those things, you're going back to those rules. Remember from Adler's theory, you're going back to those rules and not honoring who you truly are. Just remember that healing isn't about rewriting the family story. I think it's about stopping the erasure of your inner one and really seeing yourself and your experience of your childhood, you know? And if, as you've been listening to this episode, you feel something moved, stirred, let me say this. You're not disloyal for naming your experience, and you're not dramatic for needing emotional safety, and you're not ungrateful for acknowledging, pain alongside gratitude. I think these two things can sit beside each other. Please remember, same home does not mean same childhood, and closeness does not have to come at the cost of your inner peace. Sometimes healing looks like understanding. Sometimes it looks like distance. Sometimes it looks like quiet acceptance. Wherever you are on that journey, it's allowed. It's allowed. And if you resonated with this episode, number one, I would love you to let me know your thoughts on what exactly resonated with you, what you connected with in the comments section. But share this episode with someone that you love. Thanks for listening to the Mid Week Tease, a Legally Clueless Africa production. Episodes go out every Wednesday, and you can learn more about us by going to legallycluelessafrica.com.